Hello everybody and welcome back. As always, I am Mateo311 and this is your channel for everything VR related. Today, we have an insanely huge video. This is my annual games ranking that goes through my entire library of PC VR, PlayStation VR, and Quest titles, scoring them from my least to most favorite. Last year's video was amazingly successful, so thank you guys for 1 million views. But today's video is much bigger with nearly 200 titles. So strap in and get ready to take some notes, because I guarantee there's a few games you never heard of and you might want to pick them up. I've also rescored everything from last year's video, so you'll get an update of where older titles currently stand. If you're interested in my ranking criteria, that will be at the end of this video, with some games I neglected to score. There are of course links and timestamps in the description, but before we jump in, this video is brought to you by Kiwi Design, one of my favorite sites for VR accessories. They just released some brand new Quest 2 hand straps that'll give you that Valve Index feel and allow you to completely let go of the controllers. They also have plenty of other accessories like controller weights for those of you who work out in VR, cable management systems, and my favorite accessory, their super durable and extra comfy Quest 2 Elite strap. There are links down in the description, and don't forget to use discount code Mateo311 for 5% off and to help support this channel. Now, I like to start this video off with the graveyard, which is multiplayer titles that have completely lost their player base, and you shouldn't consider buying them unless something changes. Chronologically, this includes everything from Hover Junkers, Space Junkies, Air Ranger, Virtual Battlegrounds, and now unfortunately we can add Solaris Off-World Combat and Tower Tag to the list. You might be thinking we should add Medal of Honor above and beyond, but there is still a small daily player base for both PC VR and the Quest. Now, under no circumstances should you be buying these games, and in some cases they're no longer even sold. Speaking of no longer sold, I actually have to add the single player shooter Silicon Rising to the graveyard. I really love this game. For me, it was a hidden gem, but for some reason it has been removed from Steam. I've reached out to the developers regarding this, and they're claiming they have no idea why it's been removed, and it doesn't look like it's coming back. Now, there are some additional co-op titles like Star Trek Bridge Crew and Cookout a Sandwich Tale, where their player base is either low or dead, and I would only pick up these games if you have a group of friends ready to play with you. Okay, so let's move on into actually ranking some games, and I'm bypassing titles that are just completely broken and have no redeeming qualities. We'll start the list at a 6.5, which is basically just a passing grade, and these titles are usually lacking in substance or just ultimately forgettable. And first on that list is Thunder God. Cool graphics, but minimal mechanics and content. This wave shooter, or rather hammer thrower, lets you feel like you're wielding Thor's hammer until your arm hurts, and then you basically never play the game again. If you find the title on a super steep sale, maybe consider picking it up. And speaking of titles that should only be picked up on a steep discount, we have Wolfenstein Cyberpilot. It's hard to imagine how 60 minutes of Nazi murdering via multiple different remote piloted mechs could be boring, but Cyberpilot manages to pull it off. All the visceral action you expect from a Wolfenstein title is missing, and the game remains one of my biggest disappointments. Another title that severely disappointed me was Awaken. This horror game looked extremely creepy, but poor performance, horrendous controls, bugs, and a slow start ruined the experience for me. Now, they have improved some of these issues over time, but I'm still stuck on that first impression. Speaking of first impressions, right out of the gate, the Western-themed wave shooter Guns and Stories seems pretty cool. The cutscenes are a nice touch, it's fairly entertaining, but ultimately forgettable and quite repetitive. A similar title that replaces the Western theme and guns for castles and medieval weapons is Mace and Grace. Again, it's really fun to punch waves of incoming enemies. I do enjoy the humor and excessive gore, but there's nothing to really keep me playing this, and at most I might use it for something like a VR demo at a house party. Okay, so we are now moving into the 7.0 to 7.9 titles, which are good games, but not great. They might be worth picking up if you just love the genre or you find them on sale. And first on that list is going to be Rush. As the name says, Rush is supposed to be this adrenaline-filled wingsuit flying game. Unfortunately though, I just did not find it that immersive. Something like Richie's plank experience can oddly get the pulse up, but somehow flying over mountains in a wingsuit just didn't do much for me. I was a fan of the multiple different control options though. Next on our list is this year's first newcomer, Space Blockbuster. It's like physically jumping into a game of Brick Breaker, and it's definitely a fun, engaging experience. But outside of just some casual gaming, maybe showing it off at a house party, there was just nothing else pulling me back to this title, and if I was just looking to kill some time, there are better options. Speaking of better options for VR, I wouldn't recommend your first experience be a roller coaster or the title Epic Roller Coasters. The game itself is actually pretty cool, and you can pick it up for free, only paying if you want additional tracks. But roller coasters in VR is a recipe for motion sickness. After 6 years of playing VR games, I still find this title fairly uncomfortable. But I did feel completely comfortable throwing on a gi in Ninja Legends. This arcadey ninja fighting wave shooter is definitely fun to play. There's lots of cool weapons and special abilities to unlock, and there's excellent boss fights. They've added an archery section since launch, but it's still pretty shallow, and the combat isn't as good as some games that'll show up later on this list. Speaking of combat, let's become Batman, which is an absolutely amazing experience in VR. Unfortunately though, this is a bit more of an interactive story rather than an actual game, and while it does have some really cool moments, it's extremely short with no replayability. Batman had the potential to be something great, but like usual, the Dark Knight vanished on us mid-conversation. Now our next title is the wave shooter Raw Data. This was a very early VR title, and it tried to be a lot more than just a wave shooter by adding a full storyline and playable classes, plus a few on-rail segments and areas of free locomotion. Unfortunately though, at its core, it's still very much a wave shooter. The main thing holding back this title is the $40 price tag. Now moving up the list a little bit this year is Espire 1 VR Operative. This game promised to be Metal Gear Solid in VR, but failed to deliver. The launch was also unfortunately riddled with bugs. It has definitely improved since launch though, and there's now additional content. So if you're in desperate need of a stealth-based VR game, this is a decent option, but there are a few more later on in this video. Okay, so the next game on the list is going to be a bit controversial, as it has one of the largest disparities between the Quest and PC version I have ever seen. I'm talking about the action-adventure title Tarzan VR. When I played this on PC, I was truly impressed by the graphics. The running, climbing, swinging, and chest-beating mechanics were immersing me into this world, and overall I had fun with the game. But when the Quest version released at a later date, it was a significant downgrade. Those beautiful graphics were nowhere to be found, the already not great combat somehow felt worse, and I just couldn't get immersed into this world. So I'm putting up two separate scores for this one. Now since immersion is key to VR, that's why games like O-Shape can be so successful. Contorting your body into random shapes and then punching through walls is not only a fun mechanic, but it's also a fun spectator sport. Now there's other rhythm titles I prefer over this, mainly due to having different mechanics and a soundtrack more my style. But it's an excellent rhythm game alternative if you're looking for something different. Speaking of different, we have the tower defense title Djinni and Thaco. There's a large emphasis on dry humor here, in both Monty Python style cutscenes and in-game narration. There's also some gesture-based spells that help make the game more immersive, but the humor was lost on me and I found this title to be a bit unbalanced. Now something else that was lost on me is the puzzle title Doctor Who: The Edge of Time. While I enjoyed the storytelling and found the environments to be quite immersive, anything related to the TV series went over my head as I've never watched it, and mechanically this game felt like a first generation VR title. Initially I struggled with some controls more than I did the actual puzzles. Also, some aspects felt frustratingly unintuitive, like the first puzzle where you need to find the code to a safe. I'm sure there's more enjoyment to be had here for Doctor Who fans, but for me, it's not exactly what I'm looking for. Now, a similar title that did appeal to me a bit more was Proze EnlightenmenT. This is a truly challenging puzzle title with a dark theme. The game takes place in two separate timelines, and it's just a really intriguing storyline. Now, if puzzles aren't your style and you're looking for combat, we have Arashi Castle of Sin. This revenge-fueled samurai stealth title has a lot to like. The levels are open with multiple avenues of approach. Your pet wolf is a badass, and stealth kills are truly satisfying. The sword fighting and AI can use some work though, and it's also a fairly easy game. But if you're not interested in a samurai fantasy world, we have two titles that try to emulate real life. Forevr Bowl and Forevr Darts do a great job of delivering a darts or bowling experience. It's just some good casual fun and a decent alternative for when you can't get out of the house. So if your life is missing more darts or bowling, these games should scratch that itch. Or we could say to hell with reality and just play a bunch of mini games with Sam and Max. In Sam and Max, this time it's virtual. If you're a fan of the cartoon duo, this game might have some extra appeal. Otherwise, it's just a few hours of casual fun. There's shooting galleries, escape rooms, something similar to a combination between Bop It and Simon Says, and it's all wrapped up in a cool little storyline. It just might be a little too casual or kid-friendly for the average user. And right around the same level of cartoony quirkiness is Captain Toonhead and the Punks from Outer Space. This tower defense title will have you building up turrets and jumping right into the action to defend some cube-style creatures. The humor wasn't exactly my style, but I am a sucker for a tower defense, and this title did suck me in for multiple hours. But for those of you who need more action, we have Swords of Gargantua. This is a physics-based sword fighting roguelite with some truly unique enemies. Since launch, they've added 4-person co-op and new enemies, but this title gets quite repetitive and feels pretty shallow. Now on the opposite side of that, we have Warhammer Age of Sigmar Tempestfall, which has a great storyline and atmosphere, but the combat is lacking. The developers have released numerous patches since launch, which overall have improved things a bit, but the combat itself still holds this game back from being anything great. This had the potential to be something great, but it ended up falling short. If it continues to improve, it will also continue to move up this list for next year. And while we're moving up the list, we have the army-themed RTS Final Assault. If you ever played with Green Army Men as a kid, that's basically what this game is like. The RTS elements are quite simple, and you'll mainly be pushing your units down a few separate lanes, but there are a few standout moments like grabbing a plane out of midair and redirecting it to rain gunfire down on an unsuspecting enemy. You won't find many people these days playing it online, but for $9.99, it's a good way to scratch the RTS itch. Now, a completely unique title that's in its own category is Starship Commander Arcade. This is an interactive story that's controlled completely by your voice and a few head movements. You take control of a spaceship, and your choices will guide the storyline. Unfortunately though, this game has a tragic history, and even though its technology was winning awards and was highly praised, the studio could not find enough funding. So it ended up being a short arcade experience rather than an epic multi-hour adventure they originally planned. This story can be found in a documentary that's included with the game that I found to be very interesting. But to each their own, which is a perfect segue for horror titles, starting with Wraith the Oblivion Afterlife. A little bit too slow at some points and a little bit too creepy at others keeps this game from mainstream appeal. I had to push through some slow story elements in the beginning, and then as I started getting more and more into this title, I also became more and more nervously uncomfortable. Ultimately, it wasn't for me, but for the horror fans out there, you should put this one on your list, along with the next title, Hinge VR. Hinge is a psychological horror that has you navigating an abandoned skyscraper, but something absolutely horrendous is going on. You're seeing creatures, getting memory flashbacks, gravity has a mind of its own, and you really don't know what to expect next. Now, this is also a great looking game, but unfortunately, it also has some significant performance issues. And to round out the horror titles, we have The Blair Witch, another psychological horror exploration title, which has you tormented by your own memories. Luckily though, as you search through the Blair Woods, you have a canine companion to help cut the tension. Now, horror titles aren't my go-to genre, but between these three games, there's something there for any horror fan. Now, if you wanted to take part in an anime story rather than a horror one, we have Altdeus Beyond Chronos. This is basically a multi-hour interactive comic book with a high level of replayability. It's a very trippy and quite interesting story, and you'll get to pilot a giant mech, but the mechanics are minimal here, and you basically just make choices to direct the storyline. Overall though, I found it to be a very unique and entertaining title. Another entertaining title was the time-bending puzzler Time Stall. You'll get a cutscene where something goes wrong and your cruise ship robotic staff tries to go on a murder spree, but luckily you'll be able to stop time and then rearrange things to work out to your advantage. It's a cute, fun title, and sometimes that's all you need. But if you're looking to kick it up a notch, we have Airborn. Airborn has you flying around like Iron Man while taking out a never-ending onslaught of robotic enemies. You'll unlock new weapons and skills between runs, and flying around at breakneck speeds just feels so awesome. Sadly though, there's not much more to this game, and it's just a fun time killer. Now, if you still want to be agile but remain a bit more grounded, we have the parkour shooter Stride. When you get into a good rhythm, Stride feels fantastic, and it starts to live up to that claim of being Mirror's Edge in VR. While there are multiple different game modes to explore, this title is still very much in development. If you pick it up now, you'll most likely enjoy it, but you might want to wait for the finished product. But for now, plant those feet and put those guns away, because we're stepping into the arena with Iron Lights. This unique melee fighting title slows down time and has you taking turns at both offense and defense. You can't just wildly swing your weapons, and every time they make contact they will shatter and you need to reform them. It's a unique set of mechanics that just works well. There's also competitive multiplayer and a ton of different weapons to choose from. It's not my favorite melee title, but it's still a good option. And that's just like Ven VR Adventures, which isn't my favorite platforming title, but it's a good option. Ven has some really cool environments, the difficulty starts to creep up towards the end, and the title does throw a few surprises your way. I just found the combat and some of the sound design to be a bit lacking. Now, a title that I thought would be lacking but actually surprised me was Zombieland Headshot Fever. It's not quite an on-rails shooter or a wave shooter, but it plays like the classic House of the Dead titles. You'll enter a room, have to clear it of enemies, and then you could proceed forward. There's new weapons and upgrades to unlock, and there's a high emphasis on replayability. If your goal is just to pick up a fun shooter, you can do a lot worse than Zombieland Headshot Fever. And while we're on the topic of games that are just fun to play, we have Avicii Invector. This rhythm title is a port from the original flat screen version, which has you pressing keys to some music by the late DJ Avicii. You're also gliding along with the spaceship the entire time, so it makes this entire experience very chill. Now, the opposite of chill is Richie's Plank experience. Now, it's really much more of a mini game, but it's also one of a kind. The overall impact that this title can have on your senses, and it can trigger acrophobia in the bravest of us. Maybe it's not a top tier recommended title, but everyone needs to try it at least once. Unlike Medal of Honor, which some of us would be completely okay to pass on. Medal of Honor scores some points here, mainly due to the scope of the single player campaign and its relatively robust multiplayer. Unfortunately though, the campaign is unevenly paced, the Steam version is riddled with performance bugs, and the Quest version doesn't run that well. On top of that, the multiplayer is fairly dead at this point. So how did it make it this far up on the list? Well, for starters, we rarely ever get a full game in VR, and the campaign definitely has some moments later on in the game, but it's a strong mix of highs and lows. Now, if you strip away all the ambition that Medal of Honor had, and just aim for a fun, quick story, you get Final Space. This shooter, based on the TV series, is a fun multi-hour distraction. If you're a fan of the show, I assume there's some extra value here, but knowing absolutely nothing about it, I still enjoyed my playthrough. 4-player co-op is also a rare treat in VR. So next on this list is the quirky nightmare known as Virtual Reality 2. This is a brand new title that actually released right before this video, and I was lucky enough to complete it in time. Virtual Reality 2 has you uploading your consciousness into a really quirky digital world, and then everything goes horribly wrong. This game is well written and extremely self-aware, poking fun at things like the metaverse, and some levels are a quirky parody, mixing titles like Beat Saber with a meditation app. The title is really well done, but the quirky nature might not be for everyone. Now, a title that was aiming for mainstream appeal is Star Wars Tales from a Galaxy's Edge. For the most part, it is successful, but it's a bit of a bland shooter, and the best part is a small side mission where you take on the role of a Jedi. Now, this game really starts to come into its own in the Last Call DLC. From there, you get to take on the role of a Jedi, an assassin droid, and even a stormtrooper, and they kick the overall action up a notch. Unfortunately though, you do need to make it through part 1 before you can play the second part, so I'm going to put 2 separate scores here. Now, while Tales from the Galaxy's Edge is fairly popular, I'm sure most people haven't heard of the next title, Vanishing Realms. This is a classic VR RPG title that was quite frankly ahead of its time. It features collision-based combat, beautiful environments, and basically everything you'd want to see from an action RPG. It's just not a very long game, and the mechanics are quite simple. It was, however, one of my favorite original VR games, and there is a DLC package to expand the campaign. There's not a ton of VR RPG options out there, but even without any competition, it's still a solid game. And it's strange for me to put a game I enjoyed so much right next to a game that I didn't really enjoy that much at launch, and that's Warhammer 40k Battle Sister. This story-driven first-person shooter set in the Warhammer 40k universe failed to live up to my expectations. While I did enjoy it enough to play almost the entire title in just one day, the combat just came off as a bit bland, and the graphics were immersion breaking. But since launch, they've greatly enhanced the graphics, introduced a co-op horde mode, dropped the price to $19.99, and we just got another update with new enemies and weapons. So while I still believe Warhammer 40k deserves a better game than this is still a fun and fairly lengthy campaign. Now, if we jump back to rhythm titles, we have Thumper. Thumper is mechanically similar to Avicii Invector, which we already covered, but it has no chill. The overall tone, effects, music, and giant enemy looming above you is all very aggressive. It's also a great challenge that'll definitely raise your pulse, but at the same time, it's extremely satisfying when you nail the moves. And while the game doesn't make great usage of motion controls, VR does make it that much more intense. And since we like things intense, let's jump into Doom VFR. Now, I've revisited this title since last year, and it has moved up the list a little bit because a good portion of the launch bugs have been resolved. Now, while this is a solid shooter, it just doesn't feel as action-oriented as those new Doom titles. Mechanically, it's also lacking a bit, and I just didn't feel like I was that all-powerful Doom guy. And speaking of not exactly feeling the role, In Phantom Covert Ops, I didn't feel like this unseen special operative. To me, it felt a bit more like hide-and-seek canoeing. That being said though, there are some cool elements in this title, and it can be quite immersive. A 6+ hour long campaign is a lot more than we usually get in VR, and post-launch they added some trials that help with replayability. Now, I wasn't the biggest fan at launch, but this title did grow on me a bit over time. Now, if you want to unload those guns and pack a fishing rod in the canoe instead, we have real VR fishing. As someone who doesn't enjoy fishing, I was blown away at just how entertaining this title could be. Truly immersive, lifelike environments, mixed with fun fishing mechanics, and the ability to hang out with your friends. If it came with a 6-pack and a beer helmet adapter for your quest, this game would be like a 9.0. All jokes aside, it's an experience that basically anyone can enjoy, and if you want to up the challenge, you could turn off all of the visual indicators, making this much more true to life. But this is virtual reality, so who's looking for a real-life experience? Instead, let's head to a Soviet space station with Jupitergrad. Jupitergrad is a grappling hook platformer with a great sense of humor. Unfortunately for you, this abandoned space station is quite deadly. The swinging mechanics in this title are excellent, and post-launch they've added time trial levels for those of you mastering the art of the grappling hook. Overall, I was pleasantly surprised with this title. Another surprise delight was PokerStars VR. For the low price of free, you'll get your own private casino where you could join your friends or some random other players for a few games of poker. And to help keep things exciting, there's unlockable items and cosmetics, plus they've added additional games like roulette and slot machines. So if you need a quick trip to the casino, go download this game. Now, another place where you could find some treasure is Eye of the Temple. This game is uniquely VR and basically puts you into the shoes of Indiana Jones. You'll have to jog backwards on logs and use your whip to fend off creatures in this platforming puzzle title. Overall, it really reminds me of this old Nickelodeon game show, Legends of the Hidden Temple. Kids would run, jump, and climb through a temple-themed maze, all while avoiding traps, looking for treasure, and avoiding enemies. And that's basically what this game is. The title gets high marks for originality, and I've never played another platformer where I was the one physically jumping. But if that doesn't sound like it's your style, let's head back to RPGs with Vengeful Rites. Vengeful Rites is the full package. There's a full storyline, physics-based sword fighting, an RPG system, gesture-based spellcasting, and basically everything else you would expect in an RPG. It's quite similar to Vanishing Realms, but with enhanced mechanics. Graphically, the game's not the best looking, and it can still feel a bit low budget at times, but it's still a great VR RPG option. Now, if you don't care about RPG elements and just want to bash in some skulls, we have Gorn. Gorn is a slapstick, physics-based arena fighting game. It's extremely cartoony, but at the same time, gruesomely brutal. It's one of the most cathartic VR games I've ever played, and also most likely the #1 cause of VR-related accidents and bodily harm. My only real complaints is I generally like my games a bit more serious, and it does get a bit repetitive, but it's undeniably fun. Now, if Gorn is too cartoony for you, we have Swordsman VR. This is a title that significantly improved since launch, added additional content, and became a very solid arena fighting title with multiple different factions to choose from, RPG elements, and even a little bit of magic. At launch, the combat was a bit lame, but it's definitely a lot more fun now. Speaking of fun, you guys have to check out Megaton Rainfall. It's a truly one-of-a-kind VR title that basically has you becoming a god. It starts with a truly immersive flight around the planet and into space, and then moves into you gaining some powers and having to protect the city from alien invaders. It's a total power trip and a great use of VR mechanics, but overall it's a short game and a bit simplistic. Now, if godhood isn't your objective and you're just looking for a lot of fun content, we have Dash Dash World. This is a Mario Kart style racing game with a huge amount of unlockables, plenty of single player missions, and 8-player online PvP. It just recently came out of early access, and with full release, they introduced a new virtual steering system, 2 new weapons, and 7 new tracks. They also have upcoming tournaments planned for the future. So if you're looking for something similar to Mario Kart, here you go. Okay, so the next title is a little hard for me to rank. While I do love it and play it every single day, it's not exactly a game, and it's also a subscription service. I'm talking about the workout application Supernatural, which I have been using for 9 weeks straight, and my only complaint is that subscription price tag. But that's a necessary evil for all the included licensed music and the digital coaches. But for $180 a year, you can get a full gym membership. It's undoubtedly fun cardio though, and there is a free trial if you want to find out if it's right for you. Speaking of games that are right for you, Defector tried to be a jack of all trades, but mostly ended up being just good at some things. It's an over-the-top 007 style game with everything from dialogue choices that alter the storyline, minor puzzles, a fantastic interrogation scene, and a level that's basically a first-person shooter. But like I said, it doesn't master any of these and ends up being just good. Sometimes good is all you need, and that's how I felt about the roguelite shooter Sweet Surrender. There's an excellent arsenal of weapons, you have VR's favorite utility, a grappling hook, and the game is action-packed, so you don't really need much more. If you enjoy this style of game, you can lose yourself in it for countless hours. Okay, we are now moving into the 8.0 to 8.9 games. These are the games that, as we inch up the list, begin to get great. They're an excellent example of their genre, and definitely worth the full price of admission. And first on that list is Walkabout Mini Golf. Walkabout Mini Golf is probably the only virtual activity that is more fun than the real-life version. The physics, however, are extremely true to life because they suck just as much in a virtual game of mini golf as they do out in the real world. But joking aside, this game features some amazing mini golf courses, and it's just a fun, chill experience that you could share with a bunch of friends. But who wants to chill when you could be out there killing virtual monsters? Hellsplit Arena allows you to do just that, with both fantastic graphics and some excellent physics. Last year I placed this title right next to Gorn, but the title has significantly improved, and they've added jousting, which makes it that much more extreme. If you're looking for a mature themed and brutal arena fighting game, this is the one for you. But not everything can be blood and guts, and sometimes you need some one-on-one action, and that's where Blast On comes in. Also moving up the list this year, this truly unique 1v1 shooter has received multiple updates. There's now new game modes, additional weapons, a single player campaign, and a player hub to hang out in. It's also surprising to see just how much strategy is involved in this game. It might look like just grabbing guns and dodging bullets, but there's a lot more to it. Now, another game that has you grabbing guns and dodging bullets is the roguelite Compound. Now, this is very similar to Sweet Surrender, except it has a much more retro art style. While it might be lacking a grappling hook, this game also has an excellent arsenal and a great feel to it. Now, this game has technically been in early access for almost 4 years, but it's still receiving updates, and as it improves, I will continue to push it up my list. Speaking of games moving up the list, Lies Beneath has also been bumped up a few points. I originally played this game on the Quest right after Half-Life Alyx, and that's the main reason why I found it lacking. But a quick revisit on the PCVR version, and I understood what everyone was saying in my comments from last year. This is a solid horror title with plenty of action. It also features some excellent comic book style graphics and immersive sound design. But if the horror theme is too much for you, and you rather play with some action figures, we have Yuki. Yuki is an excellent bullet hell roguelite that makes you feel like a kid holding your favorite action figure. And best of all, the more you play, the more you get to update it. It's easy to get immersed in this game as you're dodging bullets, enemies, and obstacles, and trying to blast everything out of the sky at the same time. Now, instead of holding an action figure in your hand, why not a Wipeout style racing car? When it comes to racing games, Z-Race is definitely unique. There's a huge selection of YouTuber themed racing cars, all of which can be updated over time, and a series of futuristic tracks for you to master. It's an addictive gameplay loop, and I couldn't stop until I maxed out the Mateo 311 car. Another title that sucked me in a similar manner is Iron Guard. While this tower defense title is quite simple, I just really enjoy it. The campaign is over 10 hours long, and they go the extra mile with fully narrated cutscenes. Mechanically, it's a little simplistic, and it takes a while before the game starts to get difficult, but I love building the perfect defensive strategy, and then leveling up between missions, unlocking new weapons and special skills. There's not many tower defense titles available in VR, so this is easily one of the best recommendations. But Guardians might be an even better option, even though it's not only a tower defense title. It's almost like a tower defense RTS first-person shooter hybrid set in a world similar to Starship Troopers. You can play it single player or with up to 4 people online, and the game will have you gathering resources, building defenses, controlling armies, and even riding in vehicles. There's also an excellent assortment of weapons to unlock, and the jetpack. What more do you really need? I don't know, maybe a storyline? Well, Hellblade has you covered there. This absolutely gorgeous third-person action puzzle title works surprisingly well in VR. It's a dark storyline centered around mental illness, which literally and figuratively has you fighting demons. This was the first title to figure out how to integrate flat screen cutscenes, and overall it's just an intense experience. Now, if that doesn't sound like your style, maybe you'd be more interested in cards and tankards. This free trading card title allows you to jump in game, meet some people, grab a table, and battle it out with some Magic the Gathering style cards. I found deck building and implementing new strategies to be quite addictive, and the game does have a pretty solid community. I actually never played any card games prior to this, yet I still found myself oddly addicted. Now, another board game style experience that caught me by surprise is Table of Tales: The Crooked Crown. This is like your very own personal one-shot D&D campaign, narrated to you by a close friend. While mechanically the gameplay is much simpler than something like Dungeons & Dragons, it has a very similar feel and tells a truly compelling story. It's also just really cool to watch the board come alive and have all the little characters moving around. It's an easy recommendation to tabletop RPG fans. But if you're not a fan, we can always go back to killing zombies in Arizona Sunshine. This story-driven zombie shooter is playable in both single player and co-op, and it's received numerous DLCs over time, including a really fun horde mode. Unlike many other VR games, it's the full package. It's just showing its age a little bit, as it's definitely not one of the best looking games, especially on the Quest. Maybe it's destined to move down a few notches in the future, but that's not the case for our next game, Synth Riders. Originally, Synth Riders felt like a decent alternative to Beat Saber for me, but as you play, you realize it's quite different, and instead of just slicing stuff, it gets you to naturally move to the beat of the song. But what really sold me on this game were their new immersive experience songs, which are just mind-blowing. I'm not a big rhythm genre fan, but I find myself playing that algorithm experience at least once a month. So if you're looking to move on from Beat Saber, you might want to consider this game, or our next title, Pistol Whip. Now, last year, this game didn't even make it onto my list because I wasn't really feeling it, but the 2089 and Smoke and Thunder updates really sold me. I love everything about them, from the cutscenes to the different graphical styles, the weapon modifications, and the included music. While I still have a little bit of trouble connecting to the music compared to other rhythm games, this game is just oozing with style, and getting to feel like John Wick is more up my alley. And another title that's right up my alley is Grapple Tournament. This Unreal Tournament inspired multiplayer shooter is just plain excellent. Excellent graphics, it's super fast paced, a strategic assortment of different weapons, and we also get a grappling hook. The only thing holding back this game is the low player count. Luckily though, you can now pick up a free demo from the Oculus App Lab, and it will eventually get a full Quest release. And another game that's going to need a Quest release to pump up the multiplayer numbers is the online sword fighting title Swords of Gura, with a large assortment of melee weapons, and game modes like a 12-person free-for-all, team deathmatch battles up to 6v6, and even some capture the flag. This is an excellent melee experience. There are some unique sword shattering and blocking mechanics, but this game really needs to hurry up and release on the Quest, because unless you go to their Discord and plan out some matches, it's pretty hard to find a game. Now, if you'd rather keep your sword fighting to single player, we have Journey of the Gods. This is a light RPG title that makes great usage of VR, allowing you to transform into a towering entity. There's a cool storyline, physics-based combat, excellent boss fights, and some additional surprises along the way. If you're looking for a light RPG, it's an easy recommendation. Now, if you'd rather just get your heart pounding, we have Thrill of the Fight. Just get in the ring and start beating up some enemies. That's it. It's really simple, but this game delivers. 15 minutes in, you will be covered in sweat and wondering if you're actually in a real fight. There's some awesome effects when you take a solid hit, and it's always great to give your enemy a black eye, or soften him up and watch him drop his guard. Forget Supernatural or any other fitness apps, this might be all you need. But if that's too intense, we have some fun house party games to check out. Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes is about as unique as a VR game can get. One person will be in VR attempting to defuse a bomb, while everyone else in the room will attempt to give some defusal instructions. But to make matters worse, everything is designed to be as confusing as possible, and multiple different things are competing for your attention. If you haven't experienced this game, or you're looking for a party title to play, I highly recommend it. But right above that, I would recommend Takeling's House Party. Up to 8 people can take on the role of these creatures known as Takelings by using either a traditional game controller or their cell phone. Some game modes will have the VR user attempting to kill all the Takelings, and they could band together and fight back, while other modes will have the Takelings in direct competition. This is honestly my favorite party title, and I think everyone needs to try it. But many of us are lacking friends and only stick to single player, so we have a truly unique rhythm title, Against. Against is like a combination of pistol whip, Beat Saber, with a drop of stride thrown in there. And rather than slicing down blocks or pixelated creatures, there's some awesome comic book style fantasy creatures for you to mow down and chop in half. It's an excellent take on the rhythm genre for those of us looking for something a bit more gritty. Now another gritty option is Sniper Elite VR. Travel back to Italy during World War II and basically become a one-man army. The Sniper Elite series is known for that X-ray kill cam, and it's even more brutally satisfying in VR. A lengthy campaign, compelling storytelling, and lots of Nazi murdering make this a very solid title. Now if you were looking for a bit more emotion in the storytelling, we have Stormland. This single-player shooter is also playable in co-op, and it sets you down a path of uncovering what happened to this mysterious planet you're on. As a robotic unit that was damaged and out of commission for quite some time, you're not only rebuilding your memories, but upgrading your chassis. With excellent locomotion mechanics and fun combat, Stormland is definitely a fun title, albeit a bit too repetitive. But repetition can be okay if the gameplay loop is on point, and that's exactly what Swarm delivers. Swarm easily has some of the best grappling hook mechanics, and you're definitely going to need it because there is no ground in this game. You'll continually swing from platform to platform while taking out waves of enemies and picking up some truly powerful secondary weapons. This title is filled with epic boss fights, a significant challenge, hours of gameplay, and even some cutscenes. There are some multiplayer modes currently in development, and if they're successful, I wouldn't be surprised for this title to move up the list for next year. But a wave shooter that still holds a special place in my heart is Space Pirate Trainer. I love the mechanic of pulling a shield out from over your shoulder, switching to the proper weapon based on the enemy you're fighting, and even dual wielding some weapons for an extra power boost. The soundtrack always gets me pumped, the main boss is an epic battle, and their arena update is absolutely game changing. So now not only do you have a super fun single player shooter, you also have an online co-location 1v1 multiplayer title. The only issue there is you need a really large play space. So if you only have a small amount of room available, maybe the RTS title Battlegroup VR is more suited to your play space. This space battle title is currently the most in-depth VR RTS available. It features a full single-player campaign, full customization of both your ship captains and your fleet, which comes in the form of special power-ups, weapons that specialize in either dealing hull damage or shield damage, trade-offs between speed, hull strength, and shields, giving you a ton of customization options. There's also online competitive multiplayer and the ability to use voice commands. And the game also just happens to have amazing graphics. So this is easily my top pick for VR RTS titles. Now some VR shooters that tend to go under the radar these days are the Serious Sam titles. There are now VR versions of these titles available, and unlike some other ports, these work amazingly well. It's non-stop fast-paced action with tons of enemies on screen and excellent graphics. There's also a ton of content available, multiplayer gameplay modes, and I have to mention that the scale of the enemies in this game just looks fantastic. Now, some of these old school titles remain my favorite VR shooters, and that's the case for the next title, Superhot. Superhot is an extremely unique shooter. Enemies will only move when you move, turning this into almost a puzzle title. Between limited weapons and ammo to use, plus enemies approaching in unexpected ways, creates a lot of trial and error to pass a sequence. There's also a bit of quirky VR inside a VR game storyline going on, and the only thing holding back this title is the rather short gameplay length. There's definitely some replayability here, but most people want more content. Now, one of my favorite shooters with a lot of replayability is Robo Recall. The mechanics behind this title truly shine. Not only are you decommissioning hordes of robotic enemies, but you're also rewarded for doing it in style. Bounce a weapon off the enemy to automatically reload it, catch a bullet in midair and throw it back at the enemy, or just rip off some limbs. The options feel limitless, and every time you play a level, you'll earn some points to help you upgrade your weapons. I still absolutely love this game and have been waiting years for a sequel. But instead, we did get some other surprise hits like Frack. This shooter's like starring in a Vin Diesel movie that's a mixture between Fast and Furious and Borderlands. Ski right into the action with an avalanche chasing behind you, then crash land without injury right where you needed to be. Fracked is not only one of the best shooters I've played on the PlayStation VR, it's also one of the best looking games. The one crux, like many other VR games, is the short gameplay length of just a few hours. But if you're not interested in that over-the-top adrenaline-filled action and are aiming for some realism, we have Onward. Onward is VR's undisputed military sim. It's completely unforgiving and strides for realism when it comes to equipment equipment and weapon handling. No cursors, button reloads, or any of that nonsense. We are training you for war. Now, while some people might prefer something more arcadey, if you're looking for realism, this title can't be beat. But VR doesn't need to be realistic, so let's take a time-traveling journey with Wanderer. What immediately stands out in this title is the production value. This is a great-looking game with beautifully immersive environments, high-quality voice acting, and brain-straining puzzles. If this is the type of game you're looking for, it's a fantastic option and a close tie with The Gallery Episodes 1 and 2. As an older title, it's not quite the same quality as Wanderer, and the puzzles aren't as challenging, but I found this storyline a bit more compelling, and it took some really crazy turns that I was not expecting. And this is yet another title that I would love to see a sequel to. Now, if you prefer a story that's set in an existing IP, we have Westworld Awakenings. As a huge fan of the show, I thought the storyline was worked in perfectly, and mechanically, this game plays just like one of my favorite horror titles, Outlast. Love it or hate it, horror always works so well in VR, and there's a series of surprises that just works in perfectly well with the lore behind Westworld. Now, if you're not interested in horror but still looking for some adrenaline, we have The Climb 1 and 2. I dragged my feet on this title for quite some time because I expected it to bore me. Who knew that beautiful environments and well thought out climbing mechanics would turn into a fantastic VR title? It's almost oddly addicting, and the perfect level of effort is needed to play this game, so you still feel active, but you're never really getting tired. The Climb 2 could have basically been a DLC, as not much has changed, but if you like the original, you're getting more of the same. Now, a title that's almost completely alone in its own category is the co-op RPG Carnage Chronicles. Beautiful graphics, physics-based combat, 2 different classes, excellent storytelling, and lots of epic loot to find make this a fantastic game to play. In single player, it feels much more like a refined melee title, where every single strike counts, and you really need to time those blocks and counter attacks. In co-op, it turns into a bit of a chaotic dungeon crawler, but either way, it's still a fantastic experience. And speaking of fantastic experiences, we have Valve's free title, The Lab. The Lab is a collection of mini-games designed to show off just how cool VR can be, highlighting everything from immersion to mechanics. You'll get to meet Gladys and other robots up close and personal, take in some beautiful vistas, put your archery skills to the test, or explore space, and this is only a few of the mini games available. If you haven't tried it, you definitely need to, and it's also a fantastic way to introduce people to VR. Another excellent free option is Rec Room. Not only does it have a huge player base, tons of different gameplay modes, everything from RPG-style quests to laser tag, car racing, and battle royale. There's tons of ever-growing unlockables, and a pretty insane amount of player-generated content. There's definitely a younger audience here, but as an old guy, I still enjoy this game. But if you really want to lose yourself in VR for an extended period of time, you should check out No Man's Sky. This bomb of a launch turned comeback kid became an extremely anticipated VR title. While the VR launch had some rough edges, it's definitely improved over time, and there's just so much to do in this title, everything from planetary exploration to space fights, or just sitting back and building a base. And I really enjoy the option that I can switch back to flat screen at any time if I feel the need. Now, for whatever reason, I actually enjoy base building in the forest a bit more than No Man's Sky. Sure, there's a bit less to do in this game, but it doesn't matter if I enjoy it all the more. Being stranded on an island with creepy-ass mutant cannibals definitely keeps you on your toes, especially in VR. And being able to play this online with your friends not only helps cut the tension, but also helps you build some epic structures so much faster. Now, you wouldn't have been stranded on this island at all if you learned to fly by yourself, and you can do that with VTOL. VTOL is a fighter pilot sim that is a great balance between realistically challenging and just some arcade fun. Don't get me wrong, it's still pretty complex, but it's definitely not as hard as learning to fly a real jet. They've recently added multiplayer missions, a dual-seat helicopter, and this game also has Steam Workshop integration for user-generated content. As someone who's not really a sim fan, I was surprised at how much I truly enjoyed this game. And speaking of really enjoying games, we have Hyperdash and Larcenauts. Larcenauts is a hero shooter similar to Overwatch, with some excellent different characters to choose from, and some excellent VR mechanics. Issues like the completely broken Steam release and non-immersive weapons have been resolved in some recent patches, and overall, it still has a fairly active community. Unlockable characters and upgrades will keep you coming back for more, but I don't actually need that and prefer Hyperdash a little bit more than Larcenauts. The varying gameplay modes, non-stop action, powerful weapon pickups, and the ability to perform some teleportation jumps makes for some excellent combat. There's some definite strategy here, and the developers have continued to push content since the release of this game. From a mechanical standpoint, this is my favorite VR multiplayer shooter. Well, let's completely change the tempo with the quirky puzzle title, I Expect You to Die. This is a series of spy-themed escape rooms where trial and error is key, and a funny death is around every corner. They've managed to prevent the frustration of repeat failure by making every death hilarious. Open up your glove box. Uh-oh, there's a bomb in there. Smoke a cigar? Yeah, there's a bomb in there too. Basically, the first time you touch anything, it kills you. Now, another game that likes to kill you, but never in a fun way, is The Persistence. This horror-themed roguelite has you on a derelict space station where the cloning systems are malfunctioning and pumping out monstrous creatures. You can harvest their DNA for upgrades, roll the dice for some risk versus reward exploring, and ultimately try not to poop your pants, because most of these creatures are horrific. This was originally a PlayStation VR title, so there are some port issues with other versions, like no hand tracking, but it's a great game nonetheless. Now, you can't mention great VR game without me saying Until You Fall. Another roguelite title, but this one has some unique melee combat. You'll have to learn and block a series of attack patterns, and then strike back at those most opportune moments. Stronger enemies will also have more powerful attacks that you either need to duck or dodge out of the way. This game is both a physical and mechanical challenge, which will have you dying constantly and breaking into a full sweat. Luckily though, you can unlock new weapons and upgrade them between each run. Now, if you don't want to get up close and personal and prefer to sneak around, I recommend budget cuts too. I never played the original title, and I was shocked to see the main mechanic for this game is actually stealth. Back when the main method of locomotion in VR was teleportation, budget cuts came up with an elegant solution with some portal-like teleportation windows. You can clearly see where you're going to end up, and then you just pull yourself through. This is ideal for sneaking up behind enemies or scoping out areas of the map that you can't currently see. There's also some challenging puzzles and combat, a fun storyline, and a bit of surprises along the way. Now, if you have no interest in stealth or single player, our next title is the free Zero-G Sport Echo VR. This wild combination of Rocket League meets rugby will have you floating around in a futuristic arena, slingshotting off your teammates, and punching your opponent in the face, all while trying to get a disc through the goal. Mechanically, this is a hard game to master, but when you do, it is so satisfying. But to be honest, I rather play more of I Expect You to Die, and this sequel gives us just that. It's definitely more of the same as the original, but refined in almost every way. Graphically, the game gets an update, it's longer than the original with deeper storytelling, and the environment and traps are more elaborate. If you enjoyed the original or just enjoy escape rooms, this title is a no-brainer. But a lot of us crave more action, and luckily, there's blade and sorcery. This physics-based fantasy melee title continues to receive some amazing updates, including a quest release. What was once just a sandbox title with some great combat is slowly becoming a single-player dungeon crawler. But what makes this close to a must-have title is all the amazing user-generated content. You could become a Marvel character like Spider-Man or Iron Man, maybe wield the 10 rings or Thor's hammer, or just decapitate some people with a lightsaber. The Quest Blade and Sorcery Nomad Edition lags behind a little bit, especially because it doesn't have all of these amazing mods, but it's still a really fun option. Now, if you're looking for more than just fun and want a serious gaming investment, check out Elite Dangerous. This is an extremely immersive, open-world space sim. There's quite a learning curve here, and this game can be a serious investment. You'll find it extremely rewarding. Between HOTAS and VR Sport, plus amazing graphics, this is an extremely immersive game. But if that's not your style, you can hunt down some ghosts in Phasmophobia. This 4-person co-op ghost hunter is equally terrifying and hilarious. The overzealous, brave member of the group might kick in the door yelling the ghost's name and end up getting themselves or someone else killed, while the coward of the group can stay back in the van, narrating your team's demise. I've had so much fun playing this game, and if you could get past the jump scares, I highly recommend it. But there's more jump scares to come with Jurassic World Aftermath. This beautifully cel-shaded trip through the abandoned Jurassic Park is an excellent and rather terrifying story to behold. Crash land on the island after a pterodactyl attack, and then continuously play cat and mouse with some velociraptors. This can be an extremely intense experience, but there's also moments of Jurassic Park nostalgia and some well-done storytelling. If you enjoy the title, you should definitely pick up the Part 2 DLC, as it definitely has a few more surprises than the original title. Now, since we're talking about Quest exclusive titles, I have to mention In Death Unchained. This roguelite journey through the afterlife remains one of my favorite Quest titles. Best in-class archery mechanics, challenging combat and bosses, a large array of horrific enemies, lots of unlockable upgrades, and seasonal content will keep you coming back for more. Now, do not get the PC version of this game. It has been discontinued for quite some time, and the vast majority of the content and all of the new updates are only available for the Quest. But let's jump back to RPGs with Skyrim VR. Now last year I snubbed this title because for years now I've just been burnt out on Skyrim. And in truth, if you've played Skyrim before, the VR version doesn't suddenly make it that much better. Now if you haven't played it before, this is easily the biggest and most robust RPG available in VR. Spending 1,000 hours in Skyrim is quite possible, especially when you start tacking on mods that take this game to a whole new level. Extra content, graphical overhauls, upgrades that fix the game's crappy UI, and just so much more. My Skyrim mod folder is currently over 200 gigs. Now the next title on this list may surprise you because it absolutely surprised me. I never expected a puzzle platformer with a mouse protagonist to be so compelling. Excellent storytelling, beautiful environments, tight controls, and challenging puzzles make this a fantastic game. You end up forming a strong bond with Quill, and the only thing holding back this title is the short runtime. There is some replayability with hidden items to find on each level, and I found the storyline compelling enough to play through it more than once, but overall the attention to detail and level of quality are what sell this game. And speaking of quality, we have Iron Man VR. Not only does this game do an amazing job of making you feel like Iron Man between both the flight and weapon mechanics, it also tells a compelling story and is loaded with action. My adrenaline was pumping from the very beginning when you were ripped out of an airplane, and my excitement skyrocketed the second I saw the Iron Man HUD. Yes, it's a bit repetitive and held back by the PlayStation VR hardware, but this is a total package title. The game's received some nice patches and additional content since release, and if you really enjoy it, there's definitely some replayability here. Now, a title that I actually enjoyed a little bit more, but lacks replayability, is Vader Immortal. I know this is not everyone's favorite, and the storyline is only roughly 2 hours, but you also get a wave shooter style dojo, and this is the only time in your life you're gonna get up close and personal with Vader. For me personally, that's worth the price of admission. Graphically, this game looks great. I thought the storyline was a nice tie-in, and while it's mechanically simple, wielding a lightsaber and using force powers is an absolute blast. If you're a Star Wars fan and fairly new to VR, I highly recommend this game. But if that's not enough action, we have the new 4-person co-op zombie shooter After the Fall. After the Fall is some amazing Left 4 Dead style fun, and I quickly sunk about 20 hours into this game. It's a testament to the gameplay that a title with such little content is still maintaining a player base and has sucked up so much of my time. Where the game goes from here is based on how much additional content they push out, and by next year it could either be headed towards the graveyard or a must-buy title. Speaking of must-buy titles, we are right on the edge now, and a great example is the story-driven shooter Farpoint. This time-bending journey to an alien world absolutely sucked me in. While it is playable in co-op, I played through it in one single-player sitting. That's right, I was glued to my chair for over 5 hours straight. Mechanically, as a shooter, this game lacks a bit, especially if you're not using an aim controller, but the fantastic storyline more than makes up for it. But let's switch back to roguelites with Everslot. Everslot is an extremely fast-paced mix between Doom and Diablo. I love the multiplayer mechanics like twisting your wrist to activate a grappling hook or to turn your hand into a cannon. The graphics in this game are top notch, it's highly immersive, and also gives me an adrenaline kick every single time I play. The title's currently in early access, so there's only about 1 to 2 hours of single-player linear gameplay, and then it turns into procedurally generated dungeon runs, which have you collecting blood to level up. The future roadmap has some really exciting stuff, which will make this title a lot more similar to a Diablo-style dungeon crawler. I'm definitely looking forward to that, and expect this game to move up the list a few points next year. Now, another newcomer to the list this year is Demeo. Demeo is a tabletop RPG that people like to compare to Dungeons & Dragons, but it's definitely not the same. The RPG system in Demeo is much lighter, but that doesn't take away any of the fun. You get to pick from 1 of 5 characters, each with their own unique abilities, jump into one of the 3 available quests in either single player or multiplayer mode with up to 3 of your friends, then make your way through 3 levels of a dungeon, and then take down an epic boss. There's a lot of strategy and cooperation needed to survive, and the random dice rolls help keep things exciting. A single round of gameplay could take 1 to 2 hours, and until you learn the ropes, this is a very challenging game. It's also my #1 pick for tabletop fans. Now, if the tabletop isn't for you, and Demeo's RPG system just isn't robust enough, we have Legendary Tales. This is a 4-person co-op RPG dungeon crawler with a lot to love. For starters, the physics-based combat is up there with other titles like Boneworks. To experience that in 4-person multiplayer is a rare treat. The game also has fantastic graphics, an arsenal of weapons that drastically impact how you play the game, a gesture-based magic system, and a truly rewarding upgrade system. It's a combination of doing what you want to be better at in the game, like swinging a heavy sword to get stronger, plus assigning points to increase other attributes, and selecting unique skills that will drastically alter your character. For example, in my latest run, I have built a glass cannon mage. I can only take about 1 or 2 hits in game before I die, but at the same time, I can constantly rain down hellfire. Plus, I have a magical shield to help defend me. My buddy Soulfox has built an unarmed monk-style character who stuns enemies with palm strikes and can drop the biggest baddie with a flurry of blows. This is an RPG system I always dreamed of, and I already love this title in its current early access state and can't wait for them to release more content. While the content is still a bit limited, I've already managed to rack up 25 hours in this game and I'm still playing. But Legendary Tales is missing storytelling, and the best place to get that in VR is from Lone Echo. Now, besides this title starting off with a slow burn, I love everything else about it. It's some of the best graphics and highest level of immersion you can get from a VR game. The storyline is extremely intriguing, and once you get past that first hour, it has a great pace and lots of surprises along the way. Now, the only game to surpass this in storytelling is the sequel to Lone Echo. Lone Echo 2 is very similar to the original, except most of it has been improved. Graphically, it's looking even better. The storyline is even better, with a lot more unexpected turns, and they introduce some new mechanics to help keep things fun. I would love to see another sequel and additional games set in this world, but since Meta now owns this studio, and they no longer produce PC VR games, I doubt it will happen. Okay, we've made it to the must-play titles that are 9.0 and above. Unless you absolutely hate the genre, you really need to play these games. First up is the undisputed VR Battle Royale title, Population 1. With what seems like never-ending new gameplay content, this title has managed to hold on to the vast majority of its player base. We've had holiday events, Western-themed events, a medieval castle, a slew of new weapons, lots of new cosmetics, and a new rotation of game modes. Big Box is determined to keep this game alive, and they're doing a great job. But some people come to VR to experience true horror, and that's why Resident Evil 7 remains a top title. The slower pace that this game sets compared to its predecessors lends extremely well to VR and ups the overall anxiety level. It's also just so much more game and a higher level of quality than we're used to in VR. The only thing holding back this game is the fact that they never released it for PC and gave it full motion controller support. There is a mod in development for that though. Speaking of games that are great the mod, we have the undisputed rhythm title Beat Saber. Years of additional updates have only made this game better. There are now multiplayer options, a ton of new tracks to choose from, and there are some new visual updates and slider blocks on the way. And on top of that, you can mod in an insane amount of new levels. I'm pretty sure just about everyone has this game, but if you don't, go find out what you're missing. Now, the next title is a bit of a curveball that I'm sure you weren't expecting, and that's Vertigo Remastered. Vertigo Remastered is a story-driven single-player shooter that I like to refer to as Half-Life meets Rick and Morty. It's roughly 5 hours of gameplay that never gets dull, with new surprises around every corner. I absolutely loved every minute of it, and can't wait for the sequel that should be coming out sometime this year. Now, another title that hooked me from beginning to end was Star Wars Squadrons. Jumping into the cockpit of iconic starfighters absolutely blew me away. I enjoyed the 10+ hour campaign, but best of all was getting to know all the unique ships and unlocking new weapons and upgrades. The multiplayer competition could be quite fierce, but you could also play in co-op mode against the AI if you want to keep things a bit more chill. It's also a great looking game that feels authentically Star Wars. But somehow, even with all of that, the cute little platformer Astrobot Rescue Mission surpasses Star Wars Squadrons. Overall, it's just done amazingly well, with excellent mechanics, beautiful environments that are designed to make VR shine, and top-notch gameplay. Now, this is a game that would already be great outside of VR, but VR is a cornerstone aspect here and just makes the title so much better. The large scale of enemies, riding on a roller coaster, sinking underwater, or having things jump on your face all just crank up the immersion level. But for the non-platformer fans, we have Pavlov. Pavlov is unapologetically Counter-Strike in VR. It has those excellent tight gunplay mechanics that already feel extremely rewarding, and while the developer has been doing an amazing job of adding new content, the Steam Workshop integration is bringing everything from Call of Duty zombie maps to Halo clones, and even drastically different gameplay modes like the Hide. It's easily one of the best shooters available, and with so much additional content, it just never gets old. But if you prefer a single player experience, Resident Evil 4 is almost unmatched. The VR port of this 16-plus-year-old game was a major success. It doesn't matter if you're new to the series or an existing fan, it is fun for everyone. I went in thinking this title was going to be overhyped, but was absolutely blown away by all the improvements made and the attention to detail. This is easily the best game you could get on the Quest right now. But a close tie might be The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners, mainly because it has a better VR integration, and stabbing zombies never gets old. It's actually quite impressive that this story-driven survival title even runs on the Quest, let alone gives you an experience close to its PC counterpart. It's the perfect level of scary, the combat is absolutely fantastic, unlocking new weapons is quite satisfying, and since launch, they've added hours of additional gameplay. So if you can handle a little bit of fear, you absolutely have to play this game. Speaking of fear, a title that's oddly scary is Boneworks. Not in the traditional horror sense, but the zombie-like creatures and spiders that jump on your face are quite unnerving. But more importantly are the physics and overall mechanics of this title, which is currently unmatched. Combat feels absolutely amazing. You're like a mix between John Wick and a samurai, fighting some really odd creatures, and navigating through a maze of physics-based puzzles. After navigating through the multi-hour campaign, which from a storytelling point is a bit lacking, you can move into the arena or sandbox, which is an absolute blast. Whenever I'm showing off VR to people and they're looking for something intense, Boneworks is my go-to. There are some cool mods for this game you could check out also, but currently I'm much more interested in their new project, which we haven't heard about in an extremely long time. Speaking of extremely long times, that's how much I played Asgard's Wrath. Not only is this one of the best looking VR games, it's also one of the longest made for VR titles. The campaign took me roughly 40 hours to complete, but even more impressive is how this game delivers its storyline. You'll jump in and out of God mode, giving you a whole new perspective of the world. You'll possess different warriors with unique abilities, and you'll get up close and personal with the gods of Norse mythology. The title was also left on a cliffhanger, but I doubt we'll ever get a sequel. Okay, so we've made it to the top of the list, and as you guessed, the #1 VR title still remains Half-Life Alyx. It's a testament to what can actually be achieved in VR. While a lot of VR games still look like they're from the PlayStation 3 era, Half-Life Alyx looks good enough to be a modern title. It's also packing fantastic physics, excellent gunplay, and top-notch storytelling. And if that's not enough for you, the workshop keeps rolling out amazing new content. The BioShock mod is basically a whole new game, which uses assets from the original title, and could easily stand on its own as a 9-point-something title. Now, if Valve could only give us some new games, so I can update my top 10 list. Okay, so that was the list, but don't go anywhere yet because there's more to talk about. There are always some titles that you guys say, what about this, what about that? And unfortunately, I can't get to every single game. This is my personal library, and I spend all of my free time either playing games or making these videos. Now, I also didn't include any mods for flat screen titles, so don't mention Alien Isolation, Valheim, or Risk of Rain 2. Besides Batman VR, I basically excluded all other short VR experiences, and there are just a few other titles that aren't for me, and I didn't feel comfortable ranking them. This includes Gorilla Tag, which I understand the appeal, but isn't for me. Resist, which I actually found unplayable until a post-release update, but then I never got around to playing it again. And I really tried to get into Jet Island because so many people recommended it, but I just wasn't feeling it. And unfortunately, I had a similar experience with Hot Dogs, Horseshoes, and Hand Grenades. I keep titles like this on a list, and when I have free time, I jump back in, but I've been struggling to find some overall appeal, just like with my recent coverage of Zenith. 20 hours in, and I'm sure the game is just not for me, but I understand the appeal, recognize the technical achievements, but still can't figure out how to grade it, and as an MMO, I want to let it mature a bit more. Now, if you're curious about my ranking criteria, yes, it is highly subjective, but there are 3 main facets that I score games on. One is the fun factor, the second is the overall quality, and the third is value. I want you guys to be able to get the biggest bang for your buck, so if a game is cheap and fun, it usually makes it a decent way up the list, but the top slots are reserved for the highest quality games that are extremely fun to play and either have long campaigns or plenty of replayability. Now, if you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much, guys. Go ahead and give it a thumbs up, and if you like my content, please consider subscribing. I'm absolutely exhausted now, need to do a ton of editing, and I hope this excessively long video doesn't flop. Okay, guys, I'll see you on next time.